wanted to take a few minutes to just talk about some of the differences between the Chris Reeve Sebenza 21, 25, and Umnumzaan. What you see here in front of you is a large Chris Reeve Sebenza 21 here on the bottom. This is the Star Benza. It's Wilson Combat edition of the Sebenza knife, so it has this pattern milled into the scale like you see on Wilson Combat 1911 grips. The one in the middle is a Sebenza 25, and then the one up top here is a Chris Reeve Umnumzaan. This is the original version, older one with the large pivot. The newer version of this knife has a pivot that looks more similar to this with a hex head screw. They did away with this pivot, for which you need a special tool to do adjustments on that, two of them, to fit in those four prongs on each side. So they're laid out like this because really the Sebenza 25 kind of bridges a little bit between the 21 and the Umnumzaan, kind of sharing some features from each one. The Sebenza 21 is so named because it was released 21 years after the original Sebenza. The Sebenza 25 was released 25 years after the original Sebenza, and then the Umnumzaan is a separate vein from the other two. So you can see the Sebenza 25 kind of shares a general aesthetic with the 21. I mean, obviously there's some differences, but they're similar looking knives, where the Umnumzaan is pretty different, and it's a pretty significantly different blade profile and handle shape. Obviously the pivot. The construction of the handle is also quite a bit different. These have a stop pin on both of the Sebenza 21 and 25, and then on the back end we've got another fastener to hold the handle together. You'll notice that there is no lanyard hole on the Sebenza 25, where there is a lanyard hole on the Umnumzaan and the Sebenza 21. If you wanted a lanyard on the 25, you would just tie it around this this pin back here. One significant difference between these two knives is something that people really loved about the Sebenza series knives was that it had a pivot bushing, and I've disassembled a small Sebenza of mine to kind of show what that looks like. So this is from a small Sebenza. You can see it's dirty. I was just going to clean this thing while I had it apart here. This little guy right here in the middle is your pivot bushing. So this guy slides out, and you can see that it's kind of captured the pivot washers here. All these things are built to really tight, close tolerances, so that this pivot bushing is just wide enough to get through the blade, and then just wide enough to have these washers on either side, so that the pivot or the blade rotates against those as it moves. But this is something that people really liked about the Sebenza. This is different than, I don't know of any other knives that use a pivot bushing, but it has a couple of nice features to it. So instead, on most knives, all you have is a pivot screw that just goes through the blade, and the blade rotates around that screw. With this, the screw goes through this bushing, and then the blade pivots around this bushing, which means that when you tighten the knife up, you're tightening against this bushing instead of against the blade. So in theory, you should be able to tighten that knife down exactly the same every time, and you're always going to have the same amount of resistance on the blade, and it's consistent. And it also allows you to take the knife apart, put it back together without having to use Loctite and such. At least I've seen some people have said that they have to use Loctite on their Sebenza 21s and such, but I have not found that with mine. So that's why a lot of people like this pivot bushing. I like the pivot bushing. I think it's a neat feature, and I do wish that the Sebenza 25 had that. The Sebenza 25 does not. And what also is nice about having that, so this is the handle from that 21. What's nice about that pivot bushing is that I don't have to take the whole knife down to get that blade out of there. All I did was just slightly loosen both of these screws with just that lets this spread out just enough to where I can slide that whole blade pivot assembly out of the knife, do what I need to do to it, maybe run a cotton swab in there to clean off some excess grease or whatnot, and then just slide that right back in and get my pivot screw in there, tighten everything up. I've done this to all my Sebenza 21s, classics, and it's a good process. It works really well. The 25 and the Umnumzaan are more like other knives that you're going to see from Benchmade and Spyderco and Zero Tolerance, any other number of manufacturers, where there is no bushing. The pivot screw is what the blade rotates around, and so when you tighten these pivots, the more you tighten it, the tighter the blade gets. The less you tighten it, the looser the blade gets. So if you disassemble them and mess with them, then you have to kind of tune the knife to where you want it to be. Basically, you're trying to get a minimum amount of blade play when it's at lockup, and with the least amount of resistance that you can get to open the knife. So you want minimal blade play and minimum resistance to open and close the knife. Of course, the more you tighten down the pivot screw, the less blade play there's going to be, but you get to a point where it offers a lot of resistance if you're opening and closing the knife. So that's the Sebenza 25 and the Umnumzaan, and the Sebenza 21 doesn't have that to worry about. So let's take a look at the Sebenza 21 and 25 just to kind of look at some differences here. Obviously, the blade shapes are different between the two. It's a similar drop point type design, but it does have some differences. The Sebenza 21 is a hollow ground blade. Actually, all these are hollow ground blades. But this one, the hollow grind is pretty significant. And what a hollow ground means is that this area of the blade right here, it's rounded. This is not flat. So on both sides, this is rounded. As you come in here and go upwards, you can feel it curve as it gets up there towards the spine of the blade. This one has you can really feel the curvature in that area. The 25 has what Chris Reeve calls, I think it's high hollow ground technology. So this also has a curve to it, but it's much, much more subtle. This area is much closer to being flat than it is here on the 21. And that's probably going to be a difficult thing to display on video, but you can definitely feel it when you have the knives in hand and feel those blades. It's really obvious. We look back here at the jimping. You see there's an obvious difference in the jimping between the two knives. This is much more fine. This is more coarse, and you can see the pattern is irregular here too, where it's got some large jimping slots, like every third slot, and this is even. And not just the jimping in that area. This is also more rounded on the Sebenza 25, where this is flatter. I personally find the jimping to be very, very functional, much more so on the 25 than I do on the 21. And I don't know if that's entirely, it's a combination, I'm sure, of how much more aggressive this is, but I think it's really the rounded attribute that makes it work so much better for me. And I'm not saying that the Sebenza 21s is bad by any means. It's functional. I just find, for me, the 25s seems to be a little more functional. You can see, as some people brought up in other videos and such, there's a notch here. Nobody's really sure why that's there. Some people say they like it for indexing, so they know where to put their thumb or whatever. I could take it or leave it. I don't really see what the big deal is with that. You can obviously see that the handles have different shapes. This one is a little, it feels much smaller in your hand than the 21 does to me. I find the 25 to be extremely comfortable. I mean, they're both really comfortable, but if you watch the Apostle P videos, he says that the human hand was created to hold a stick. And this, the 21, is much more stick-like than the 25. Well, I would say that human hands and sticks all come in a lot of shapes and sizes. And to my hand, I have a medium-sized hand. To my hand, the 25 fits absolutely perfectly. These cutouts, just when I hold this knife, it just melts into my hand. It just locks in, and it feels really good. The 21 feels good too. I have no complaints with its ergonomics at all. But to me, the 25 just feels a little bit better. And that's going to be personal preference, obviously. If those finger grooves, fit your hand as well as they fit mine. And it's the same thing you'll see with like finger groove pistol grips. People will say that they don't like them. Some people like them, some people don't. And especially on the Glocks, people talk about that between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 Glocks, how the Gen 3s have the finger grooves on them, and a lot of people don't like that. Some people do. The Gen 3s fit my hand just fine. But anyway, as far you can see, I've taken the pocket clips off both of these knives, and I did that because all of my Sebenzas, small, large, even this Umnumzaan, I've taken the pocket clip off them. They all feel a lot better to me without the pocket clip. And you can see that the pocket clip, I should have grabbed those. I'll try and do a photo with I'll show the pocket clips on these two to show what I'm going to be talking about here. But the pocket clip here on the 25 rides much closer to the edge of this lock bar than it does on the 21. So a lot of people complain that there's more of a hot spot created by the pocket clip here. We can take a look at the pocket clips, some differences in the pocket clips here. Now, as you can see, I've removed the pocket clips from all three of these knives. On any of these knives that I actually carry and use, I remove the pocket clips. I think that all of my Chris Reeve knives feel much better without the pocket clip on them, and that's the way I prefer to use them. So I'll just carry the larges in a sheath and the smalls in the little pocket leather Chris Reeve pouch. But if we take a look here at the pocket clip on the 21 and 25, you'll notice that the pocket clip on the 25 rides much closer to the edge of this handle than it does on the 21. And a lot of people you'll see have complained about that because they feel that this pocket clip creates more of a hot spot than this one does because it sits so much closer to the edge of the handle. I can say that I noticed that to some degree. I wouldn't say that it's anything crazy, like I don't feel it digging into my hand, but it was a little bit noticeable. But as I said, I prefer not to have pocket clips on any of them, so I take them all off and put pocket clip inserts on them. I'm waiting for some to get in stock for these larger ones so that I can put pocket clip inserts on these. And you can really see too, if you look at the bottom of this handle, see how this curves more, this whole handle curves more, where this is a little bit straighter. So some other differences here between the 21 and 25, and this is a big one to me, and that is that the 21 uses just a titanium lock bar. The surface of it, the face, has been hardened. Let's see if I can show the area there at all where it's kind of been hardened. It's going to be difficult to do, but you'll see a triangular area if you take these apart, and I believe that triangular area is where they've actually done some hardening on it. I'm not sure. I know you'll see a triangular area here on the side, but they do harden the actual lock face, and that's to reduce wear because titanium is a softer metal than steel. So as you open and close this knife, eventually the harder material is going to win out, and it's going to wear the face of that titanium lock bar. So they harden it to try and minimize that. Now on the 25, the lock bar has a ceramic ball. And I'm not going to take these two knives apart because both of these have the ceramic ball, the Umnumzaan and the 25, but I've got these set right where I like them. I'm not going to take them apart and have to readjust and Loctite and do all that stuff. The 21s, I'll take those apart all day. I don't care about that. But with these, I'm not going to go through all that. But the 25 has a very large ceramic ball. And let's see. You can see the top of it if you look right in there. That's it right there. That's the top of that ceramic ball. That ceramic ball acts as both your detent. As I rotate this blade, you'll see a large hole appear right there. That's your detent hole, that great big hole right there. So that ceramic ball, when the knife is closed, clicks down in there, and that's what keeps your blade from coming open. When you open the knife, you get that nice click. That is the ceramic ball clicking into place against the back of that blade tang. And you can really hear the difference between a Sebenza 21 and 25 when they open. So you'll notice it here. Let me go ahead and open the 21. And we'll open the 25. Sometimes it's more pronounced than others. But it's definitely a louder click. The locking on the 25 to me just feels more secure than the 21. And the 21 does not feel weak or fragile by any means, but the 25 just feels more stout to me than the 21 does in lockup. Overall, I really like the 25. If the 25 had the pivot bushing that the 21 has, to me it might be the perfect knife for me. And I know other people's opinions will vary on that. That's just my opinion on that. But I still like both of the designs and I like both of the knives, even though this doesn't have the pivot bushing. And we'll take a look at the back of the blade tangs here. And if you look at these, you can see how they have different types of lockup. If I can get that camera to focus on these. There we go. So you'll notice, this is the Sebenza 21. You'll notice that there's a, let me get my pointer here. You'll notice that there's kind of a worn rectangular area in here. That's where the lock bar is interfacing with the back of the blade tang to lock the knife open. On the Sebenza 25, you don't have that large rectangular area. You have a very, very small, narrow channel right here that's being worn on the back of the blade tang from the ceramic ball, because it's got, of course, that ball has a much smaller interface than the rectangular lock bar does that engages the back of the blade tang. So you can see the difference there on how these knives lock up. Something else while we're on this side of the knife that we can also take a look at, the pivot washers are different on these two knives too. And the pivot washers, from what I've seen with my various Chris Reeve knives, have kind of changed over the years. But on the 21, let's take a look at that one first. You can just barely see the top of the washer right there. Over here you can see more of it, and you can see a hole right there. That's a pocket used to kind of catch grease or lint or stuff as the knife is open and closed and whatnot. And those pockets are all around the bushing. On the 25, see a little bit of the bushing right there, but on this side you can really see a lot of that bushing. And you'll see some of those pockets. I think we can see, maybe not. Yeah, I think you can just see the top of one of the pockets there. But you'll also notice that there's a little notch right here on this bushing, and that interfaces with a hole on the handle, because where these bushings on the 21 are completely round, you just have to make sure to get the right one on the right side, because the one on the lock bar side is smaller in diameter than the one on this side. And then, so you just got to make sure you get the right one on the right side with that. With this, you have to have, on the lock side, it has to be oriented correctly, because there's actually a cutout here So the bushing is larger on this side, but to do that, they had to free this area up, so they actually made a cutout. And so this little tab here interfaces with the handle, and that makes sure that the washer is aligned properly for proper function. Now, something else on the 25 that has to be aligned for proper function, I'm really going to try and show this. It may be difficult without taking the knife apart. But the stop pin on this knife is round. And on most stop pins on most knives, you're going to see they're just a round stop pin. On the 25, it is not round. The stop pin has a flat area. Now, the flat area faces in towards the blade. And the reason for that is, we're going to try and show this. Get a white background there. If you notice how close, look at how close that blade rides to the stop pin as it rotates. If you don't have that flat spot oriented correctly, then the blade will hit the stop pin and it won't open and close. Okay? So it's got to have that flat face oriented properly. And a lot of people I saw were complaining about that on the different forums and such. Because it just makes the reassembly of the knife a little more complicated. But what I did is I Loctited this. I got the pin oriented properly, and I just Loctited this screw, set it all up, so that way whenever I take the knife apart, I just leave that in there. I don't take this screw out, so it just stays in there and it's always oriented correctly. I've never had an issue with that stop pin rotating on me and causing the knife to lock up or anything. So my recommendation is just to Loctite one side or the other. And I did it on this side. So that's just something to be aware of. But it's just because that blade, it rotates very, very closely to that stop pin. So it needs that flat area in order to clear the stop pin and rotate completely. Just something to keep in mind. Yeah, overall, I really like both of them. Now, let's take a look at the Umnumzaan a little bit here. This is a pretty different knife. You can see that the blade shape is significantly different. I mean, it's still got the general drop point shape here for the edge, but it's got a lot of swedges and little harpoon type feel to it going on. I like it. It's neat. Something a little bit different. I personally, I really like the look of this old pivot. I have no interest in getting a newer Umnumzaan with a newer pivot. I think this older pivot really makes this knife. I think it just makes it, that along with this blade and this kind of frag pattern here, the whole knife just comes together really well. I like the way it looks. I'm not saying that the newer pivot is bad or anything. Aesthetically, I just prefer this. I think this really makes the look of the knife. I don't like that you have to have the special tools, a pair of tools to mess with them, but I'll live with that. I don't really care. This is also a hollow ground blade. It feels more like the Sebenza 21 than the Sebenza 25 to me as far as the amount of curvature in this section. Now you'll notice that this knife does not have the stop pin like the Sebenza 21 and 25. Okay, your thumb studs are your stop pins on here, and you'll see that with some other types of knives, some zero tolerances, zero tolerance 0566 specifically. It just has your thumb studs, your stop pins. And you also notice, maybe you can tell the difference there, that the Umnumzaan is kind of quiet on its deployment. And that's because there are little rubber O-rings here. I believe these O-rings are number 60 in size, and you can replace them really easily. You just pull off there, and those are available just at a hardware store, probably on Amazon or something. And I think that was put on there to kind of reduce wear in this area, but I don't know how true that is. It definitely makes it a little quieter to deploy the knife compared to the other two Sebenzas. So just something, once again, that's kind of different. The jimping is different on these Umnumzaans as well. Let's take a look at all three of these guys back here. You see all three of them are pretty significantly different. For me, the 25 is the most effective jimping. The 21 is fine too. None of them are bad. I mean, none of these knives have bad features on them. They're all just different. So, you know, if you're shopping around trying to decide which one to buy or whatever, it doesn't matter. They're all good. So, I do like this cutout right here on the top of this blade. It fits the thumb really nicely. I would say of these three knives, the Umnumzaan for me is the least comfortable handle. It's not uncomfortable. It's just, this one to me is that it has more of that stick-like feeling that the Apostle P mentioned in his videos. That's just me. It feels more like a stick than either one of these two do. One thing I do dislike about this knife, that is disengaging the lock bar. As you can see, the 21 and 25 both have quite a bit, especially the 21. The 21 is a breeze to disengage. The 25, not quite as easy as the 21, but there is some meat to grab there. I personally wish they had cut out just a little bit more to give you a little bit better purchase on the lock bar on the 25. But they really should have done something else with this 21, or this Umnumzaan, I'm sorry, because there's just the tiniest little lip there to grab onto, and I'm not sure why they did that, but you can do it. It's obviously, I can do it with one hand, but it's I really would have liked to seen a cutout or something here, something else to disengage that a little bit more easily. You'll notice this old one also does not have, the newer one has a lock bar over travel stop on this side, a circular disc. Let me see if I can find another knife readily available that has one. This guy right here. This is a Lion Steel. So it has the newer one has a disc here. Now it's just a flat disc. It doesn't look anything like this. But that just keeps you from pushing the lock bar over too far. Now from what I understand, from what I've read, you'll notice the Sebenzas don't have that. None of the Sebenzas do. They only put it on the Umnumzaan, as far as I know. And I guess they had a problem with some people. They felt that the Umnumzaan was too difficult. It may have been that it was too difficult to disengage because they didn't have enough meat to grab there. So they were taking the knife apart and like bending the lock bar out to reduce pressure on it. I don't know if that had to do with the disengaging of the lock or if they found it too difficult to open. I do not find this knife difficult to open at all. I do find it a little bit difficult to disengage, but that doesn't have to do with the tension of the lock bar. It has to do with there's just not enough meat to grab onto. So anyway, Chris Reeve knives put that little circular lock bar over travel stop on there to mitigate some of that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't try and bend my stop bar or my lock bar or anything like that. The Umnumzaan, supposedly this is supposed to have a glass breaker type of function, the blade tang that sticks out there when the knife's folded. I can't see myself ever doing that, but it's there, I guess. The Umnumzaan does also have a ceramic ball, detent, and lock bar interface, just like the Sebenza 25 does. The ball on the Umnumzaan is smaller in diameter than the one on the Sebenza 25. You can see just the top of it sticking up there above the lock bar right there. If I rotate this blade down, you'll see it's, right there we can actually see, you can't see this on the Sebenzas, but its detent hole is right there. And the detent hole is smaller on, it's smallest on the 21, and then this is in the middle, and then the 25 has the largest detent hole. So, yeah, overall, all these are really great knives. I would say, utility-wise, I would probably stick to one of the Sebenzas. I like having the Umnumzaan in my collection. Just like I said, it's got a great look to it, kind of unique. But utilitarian functionality, I personally would prefer one of the Sebenzas, either one of them. It really doesn't matter. I really don't think that anybody would be terribly disappointed with either. If you're just getting into Chris Reeve knives and you want to try one out, I do strongly recommend that you start with a large 21. I think that's the best way to really appreciate the design of the knives, is to start with that one. But you know, and I do recommend going and buying them used from a trusted source. Blade Forum Exchange, there's a lot of good people on there. I'd recommend going and trying them out there, because you can buy these things and then sell them at little to no loss at all. So that way you can kind of try some different things out, sell what you don't like, and keep what you prefer. So there's a little bit of information on those knives. I know that information's out there elsewhere, but I've got these knives now, and I just wanted to kind of add my 2 cents on them, give my opinions, and hopefully you found that helpful or informative in some way.